Hello, I'm Melissa. I have a neighbor named Louis. Such a good uncle. He is always friendly. He will help to bring the bags home. He will load heavy garbage in bins. Sometimes he will go outside to the ice cream car and buy each of the kids a horn. He moved to our area quite recently, and as happens with neighbors, everyone is curious about who, where, and what he breathes. No matter how many times my parents went to meet him and drink tea, he kept joking, calling himself Virtue. But I was terribly interested in what that meant, if only because my windows looked directly onto his house, and I often saw him bringing homeless people to him. I wonder why he needs them. Would a normal person bring them to his home? For example, when my parents and I see such, the maximum that we can do is to give them alms in the form of money or food. But bring them home, this is something new. But the strangest thing was that these people came to him, but did not leave. The question was, where did he put them and what did he do with them? For this reason, I invited my friend Rem to my house. Although he was younger, it was interesting to communicate with him. Rem is a brainy guy. I called him for a reason. I asked him to conduct an investigation of this neighbor with me. We called our operation Virtue. We set up a security camera, armed ourselves with binoculars, and began to record the time, days, and number of people whom Louis brought to his place. For a week, about 1 to 2 people came to him, and not a single one came out. Rem made a rough calculation of the square of the neighbor's house. It turns out that even having a huge house, it is impossible to accommodate so many people at the same time. In addition, we rummaged in his trash can and found receipts from purchases from the supermarket. Virtue bought about the same amount of food for 1 or 2 people, no more. This indicated that either he starved all the homeless or, oh no, he eats them, suggested Remy. The thought floated in my eyes. So that's it. Now it all fits. This is why he bought few products. This is why he never buys meat. Does he eat these people? I said with horror. We wrote down this theory in a notebook and on video to pass on to the police. We could not believe that this supposedly kind man eats human flesh and then walks as if nothing had happened and greets us. Well, of course, homeless is the safest option. They have no relatives, no connections, nothing. No one even knows about their existence and will not search. This is free food, I thought. But I wonder where he stores so much meat and body remains. We had to scout everything, then go to the police with the facts. Remy and I agreed not to tell the adults yet. They wouldn't like it anyway, but we needed to get to Louis's house. Thanksgiving was just approaching, and I invited my parents to visit a neighbor with a baked turkey. Mom agreed. She baked the turkey herself, and we went there with the whole family. The neighbor was delighted with us. When he saw, I watched his reaction. I wondered if he was eating animal or bird meat. He cut a turkey in front of us and we dined there. It was not in vain that I asked my mother to prepare food and take it with me. I did not want to take risks and eat any person. Louis complimented Mom's cooking and suggested that we sit on the veranda and drink lemonade. It was the perfect moment. I asked to go into the house, supposedly to the toilet, and I myself was looking at the rooms. The house was small. I was looking for something, only I myself did not know what exactly I was looking for. Suddenly, I was lured by the stairs leading to the basement. I slowly opened it, and a smell came from there. It was unpleasant, disgusting, the smell of dirt and sweat. I went down the stairs and saw a couple of black garbage bags. They were open. As I approached, I realized that there were clothes inside. Dirty shoes, pants, shirts. They all belonged to homeless people. Here it is. This was proof. So this is true, I thought, when suddenly I heard steps behind me. Ah! I shouted when I saw Louis behind. He looked at me with a calm, cold look and asked what I was doing here. I said I was lost and ran upstairs to my parents. Mom and Dad just thanked him for the company, and we went home. I immediately wrote it down in a notebook and called Remy that evening. My hands were shaking with excitement. I didn't know what to do with myself. Later, my mother came into the room and asked what was the matter. I told her everything as it was, that our neighbor was catching homeless people and eating them. She just laughed and said that these were just my fantasies. This reaction was to be expected. I had to act on my own. The next day, Remy and I ran to the police station to tell the sheriff. He laughed, but decided to come just in case and check the house. There was nothing there. Everything was clean. We were reprimanded and left, and I stood with Remy on the doorstep and blushed when our parents scolded us. The neighbor stood with folded arms on his chest and looked at us with a grin. I could not sleep that night. I dreamed that he got to us, that he ate the whole block and he had nothing for it. Remy offered to act independently. Since adults don't trust us, we have to take matters into our own hands, my friend said. The next time we saw Lewis's car approaching, we armed ourselves with a baseball baton, hid in the bushes, and waited. When another homeless man got out of his car and they went home, we ran up from behind, hit our neighbor on the back, and shouted for the man to run away from the cannibal. He got scared and ran away, and Virtue managed to close the front door behind us. Then we realized that we had a cover. I was very scared, already imagining how he would butcher us and eat us for breakfast. "Are you out of your mind? Are you attacking me?" he shouted, wincing in pain. I tightened my grip on the bat and shouted not to dare approach us. But Lewis shouted, "What's going on?" I shouted to him that we all know. "We know you kidnap homeless people and eat them." His reaction embarrassed Remy and me. At first he was surprised, and then he began to laugh wildly. After a few minutes of laughter, he asked us if we really think so. So we just shook our heads. Lewis took ice out of the refrigerator, put it on his neck, and said that he was not kidnapping them, but inviting them to his home, offering a job at a ranch outside the city. He explained that he works as a volunteer and his task is to find homeless people. He dresses them, offers them shelter, work, and food. After they take a shower and eat, I take them to the ranch. There is a lot of work in the village and strength is needed, and these men easily agree to work for food and a clean night. Thus, our organization helps them, and volunteers are called virtues, he said. Remy and I stood, listened to him, and understood what idiots we were. I felt a terrible shame, and we asked for forgiveness. Then Lewis invited us to help him in this matter. "Let's have dinner together." "I have some baked meat." "Don't be afraid, it's chicken," he said, and laughed.
I'm Charlotte. Just a month ago, I managed to get out of my boyfriend's trap. Ex-boyfriend, actually. I'm still reeling from the horror I've been through. And the first thing I found out is that my boyfriend is actually a maniac. I'll tell you about it because I can't keep silent any longer. In the meantime, subscribe and watch other animations. After all, we still have a lot of interesting stories. Anyway, it was winter when we met Benjamin. We ran into him at the ice rink. Everything seemed so romantic. Benj kept me warm with his jacket that night, buying hot coffee while we went for a ride. And in the late afternoon, we went to a dinner and ate burgers, and after that, he didn't walk me home. It was wonderful. I laughed a lot with him, and Benjamin could make jokes. Then he showed up the next day, invited me for a walk, and the next day we went to a movie, to a cafe. Each time he came up with a new occupation. We saw each other every day, and when it didn't work out, he wrote or called. Imperceptibly, feelings grew. I introduced him to my friends, mother, and sister. Even though it hadn't been long since we'd started dating, I felt like I loved him. He made a positive impression on everyone, and I was proud of it. Benj himself was a little older than me. He was the only man in the family, so he earned as much as he could to support the family, his mother and brother. I was struck by his strength of spirit, the optimism that he exuded. Several times he left for work in another city, but never forgot to bring back some souvenir. However, he never told me exactly what he did, and I didn't know where he lived. These things didn't bother me at all, because the main thing was his attitude and love. About 3 months later, Benjamin invited me to spend the weekend with him. He rented a small cottage in the mountains. It was already spring, and the view from there promised to be amazing. I told my mother I was going to Tiffany's to study for my school exam, and I went with him. My girlfriend promised to cover for me. That's why I loved her the most. She told me not to worry about anything and to rest. What could sound better? I quickly packed my bag and ran out of the house. My boyfriend was already waiting for me on the street. We jumped in the car and drove off. Despite the fact that it was raining and it was cool, the mood was good. Spring, after all. A couple of hours later, we arrived at this cottage. It was beautiful, small, incredibly cozy. There were only 4 rooms, and the living room with the fireplace was the largest. It was warm inside, and there were groceries in the kitchen. It turns out that Benjamin had already made supplies for us. I offered to make pasta, but he said that he would do everything himself. Poured me wine, sat me in a chair, covered me with a blanket, and went to cook, while I watched my favorite TV series on my laptop and waited for dinner. From the kitchen floated a delicious smell of something meat. After a couple of hours, Benj called for food, and he cooked chicken in the oven and a salad. After a big dinner, we went out on the porch, but he stood behind me and hugged me, talking about his feelings. I don't think I've ever been happier. It was beautiful. Suddenly his phone rang, and he went into the house. And I wanted to enjoy the cool air, and I stayed. A second later, I heard the sound of a voice. Or I thought I heard it. I started to listen, but it was hard to do because of the rain. The strange thing was that there was nothing else nearby except our house. Voices from the basement? Then someone touched my shoulder sharply from behind, and I screamed and shuddered. It was Benj. "What are you doing? Is everything okay? Can you have enough wine already?" he said, laughing. Then he apologized and said he needed to leave for a couple of hours. His friend had a flat tire in his car, and he was stuck not far from here, and he needed help. I nodded my head and said that everything was fine. I would wait for him here. Benji started the car and drove away. I went inside and poured myself more wine. The empty house didn't look so nice to me now. As soon as I sat back in my chair, the same voices rang out in my head. I tried to distract myself by turning up the volume on the show, but I kept thinking about that voice. Am I being paranoid? Turning off the computer, I lay down on the floor and tapped my fist several times. And I was answered. Oh my God! I knocked again and heard, "Save!" I was terrified. I got up abruptly from the floor and didn't know what to do. Then I heard the blows and pleas for help even more clearly. I was so scared that I wanted to run. I ran out into the street, reached the gate, and stopped. Something made me come back. I knew the sounds were coming from underground. I ran into the backyard and found a door leading to the basement, which was covered with boards. I could barely dig it out, and there was an iron lock on the door. I managed to break it with a crowbar. Then I saw steps leading down. It was damp, dark, and smelly. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and started walking slowly down the stairs. Inside, there were some unnecessary things and nothing else. Then I heard again, "Save!" It turns out there was another room. I opened the door and saw that inside the dim light is sitting some girl. Looking at me, she began to ask for help in a loud voice. My legs gave way from fear and my heart seemed to run into my heels. Somehow intuitively, I ran to her and untied her hands. The girl was unhurt, but very exhausted. She looked at me in the face and told me I had to run away. We held hands, but the door closed abruptly. She screamed, and I realized that Benjamin was back. I asked him to open the door, promising that everything would be kept secret, no one would find out what happened here. I swore. And he just said, "You're right. No one will know what happened here." And the footsteps began to move away. Emily, that's her name, got hysterical and started crying and said that he was going to come with a camera and start hitting us and taking pictures. This was his fetish, and it was the least of the evils that he did with other girls. "He's a real maniac!" screamed Emily. But I wasn't ready to give up, and I wasn't ready to panic. He left out one detail, my phone number. I immediately called the police and gave them my approximate location. Help should be here any minute. Suddenly, we heard the door begin to open slowly. I pressed myself as close to the wall as I could. Benj came down the steps, and I hit him in the back of the head with my phone. He fell, but got up quickly and hit me in the face. Then he started saying that no one would be able to get out of his trap and attacked me again. Amelia jumped on his back, but he deftly turned her over on the ground. I could already hear the dogs barking in the street. The police had arrived. We screamed as hard as we could. Employees quickly broke down the door to the basement. Benjamin did not even have time to think as he was handcuffed. Emily was very scared, and I was also in shock. It turns out that his name was not Benji, and he has recently been wanted in a neighboring town. His weakness is schoolgirls. In general, he is a pedophile with abnormal sadistic tendencies. Now he faces jail. While I don't go to the rink anymore.